Good morning, everybody. Welcome to another edition of News24 Live. We are coming to you this Friday morning on the day the ANC is beginning its 6th policy conference, a gathering where about 2,000 of the party's leaders and branch delegates will reflect on the party's policies, assess the work the ANC has done in government, and chart new policies for the party to implement internally as well as in the state. Now, the policy conference is important because it is a measure of what the party has done and the role it plays in government, but it is a measure of the state of play of politics within the ANC ahead of its December conference. Now, more importantly, this policy conference, needs to assess how well the party has done in terms of implementing its policies and chart new policies. And like I said, it affects you and I because these policies end up being government programs and legislation. Now, my name is Qaanitah Hunter. I am the assistant editor for politics and opinions at News24. Joining me this morning is an esteemed panel of my colleagues, News24 columnist Mpumelelo Mkhabela, who is the author of the forthcoming book, The Enemy Within, How the ANC Lost the Battle Against Corruption. Thank you, Mpumi, for joining us. Carol Paton, writer at large at FRONTLINE, and Pieter du Toit, assistant editor for In-Depth and Investigations. Thank you very much for joining. It's a big day for us, right?
Right. Absolutely. Look forward to it.
So Mpumelelo, President Cyril Ramaphosa, I'll start with you. He is expected to address this gathering at the Nasrec Center. We were all there yesterday. We collected our accreditation. The policy conference starts today. He's expected to address delegates at 10 o'clock, probably be a little bit late. But he needs to give delegates an overview of where the party is at, both in society but also as the governing party. What do you think the mood will be like when the president takes to the podium later this morning?
Look, Qaanitah, the mood is it's a mood of a party under siege. Under siege in a sense that as itself, it admits in its own documents, it's fast losing public trust, and it's mired in factionalism, mired in corruption, and most importantly, for a policy conference of this nature taking place ahead of the December conference, elective conference, is the question of factionalism. So you have had regional conferences that took place, provincial conferences that took place, all of them mired in factionalism. And all of those factional politics of the regions and the provinces are coming together here under the policy conference where they're supposed to review government policies. They're supposed to review the party's own internal mechanisms to implement those policies. But it might end up being a conference overwhelmed by all of these factional politics coming from all over the country now gathering under one roof. So the president addressing a conference coming here in terms of that context would have to be very realistic, would have to be bold, and has to be very honest in terms of giving direction of where he wants to see the party. But at the same time, he can't be bold to the point that he is seen himself to be part of the factions. They already class him as part of a particular faction. And so the question is, how does he win everyone so that everyone realize they're actually part of one and the same party? And can he get people out of their cocoons of factional politics? That's basically the challenge of the ANC. As he himself is seen as leading a particular faction, can he actually get everyone on board to basically assess the state of the ANC using the same criteria, using the same formula, using the same kind of vision going forward? So those I think are the challenges. He's a great guy when it comes to platitudes, no doubt. He's gonna shower them with platitudes, yes, how great the movement is. He's gonna give them all of those niceties. But
the sound bites are going to be great.
Yeah, he's very good with that, and he delivers his speech with his iPad and all of that. But he can't overlook the fact that there are these other difficult situations. So if he just gives platitudes and forget the realities, then he would look like, at least in the public, it would look like he's not real. Again, if he focuses on the realities, which are very harsh, and forgets to embellish them with some niceties, then he might actually split the conference even further. So he has to find a balance.
I mean, you write this morning that the ANC is racing against time. It has no record of acting with speed to address its own crisis or the country's. The thing about the president is that there is never a real sense of urgency when he gives a marching line.
No, there isn't. I mean, that's the problem with this conference, that some might say, well, the horse is already bolted. How much more can you do? Or can you get, I mean, between now and 2024? Because the real challenge now is, can the ANC survive the kind of defeat it suffered in the 2021 municipal elections? So, of course, the dynamics of the national and the municipal are not necessarily the same. But we can't, you can't ignore the fact that for the first time in its history, it is dipped below 50%. So the challenge is for the ANC to avert that going forward. So how much time does the ANC have between now and then? It's not known for acting fast. Ramaphosa himself is a very slow person, consensus builder. Sometimes he never gets into the outcome of the consensus. So there's very little you can do between now and then. So all they can do now is basically to make new promises, maybe try to be seen to be doing something. There's actually one lever of influence they could pull to actually gain public trust, but that lever is also disappearing. That's the lever of step aside, because the public was actually taking the ANC seriously on the step aside. If they had gone hard,
as hollow as it was, right?
Yeah, but if they had gone hard and implemented it, and they've seen to be telling people not to contest if you have been charged, or to get out if you have been charged of corruption, or you are facing allegations of corruption, I can tell you, the public will always want to give the ANC a chance. But the ANC keeps pushing people away from it. So if they scrap the step-aside rule, which is really going to be a contentious issue in this conference, I think that's the quickest thing they can gain public trust. But doing that means a lot of people lose their positions. A lot of people get out of the ANC, get out of comfort zones and all of that. So it's not really possible to avoid.
Carol, can I just ask you here? You've opined this morning about speed and Ramaphosa. You say over the past 4 years, Ramaphosa's administration has been inordinately slow to make progress, particularly on economic reform. He has nonetheless set a clear line of march on his approach to the economy. The question around analyzing the speed to which he has done anything in this last 5 years and the commitment to change anything going forward, that's definitely going to be a bone of contention, if not something that we have to take seriously.
Well, I think one of his problems is that, yes, he has tried to set a particular line of march on the economy, with inviting the private sector into areas that the state used to have as its own sort of its own realm. But the difficulty is that he's taken it so long to do it, and the reforms have been so spread out and so slow that there's been no impact. So he hasn't got anything to show for his approach. And
he'll try.
He'll try.
What might he?
Well, I'm sure he will say. We've done all of these things. We've putting these things in place. We've got the energy plan. We've got the economic reconstruction plan. We've got presidential employment stimulus. We've got all of these things. But the fact of the matter is that people know that the economy isn't working. There's been no liftoff at all, and that's the difficulty, because then in the ANC, the tendency then is to say, well, obviously this approach is not working. The state needs to do more. It's the state that needs to actually get involved and run the economy. We can't trust the private sector, or they don't do it, and that contradiction in the ANC. We need to move for anyone to make progress on the economy. We need to move beyond that, where everyone says, okay, we all agree this is the direction, and that's we've never reached that point.
Yeah, but yesterday, ANC Treasurer General, who's acting Secretary General, who's acting Deputy Secretary General, Paul Mashatile, called a meeting of provincial chairs and secretary, almost to just kind of whoop delegations in line to say that, you know, there's going to be a lot of contentious debate, there's going to be a lot of fractious, discourse. Let us try to, you know, get some sort of respect and you know, some semblance of decorum in the discussions. So that was obviously happening, but from speaking to party leaders who were in, you know, steering committee meetings and have been reflecting on what had come out of provincial general council meetings ahead of the policy conference, there seems to now be this kind of, you know, the similar public sentiment of, you know, but what have you done? You know, that kind of urgency message with branch delegates. And I think what you're going to see is this almost aggressive effort to call out ANC employees in government, to separate them from ANC in a way, to ice them out, to say, okay, Ramaphosa, you tell us what you've done. Pravin Gordhan, you tell us what you've done. I don't think it's going to be meaningful, but I do think there's going to be a lot of pressure on ANC employees to say, okay, we have all of these urgent crises. How much do you think is going to be a real effort to hold ANC employees accountable, and how much of it is going to just be part of that noise that you argue this week is characteristic of the ANC policy conference?
Look, I think most of it is going to be noise. Most of those deployees that you say are going to be called out, government deployees, asking them directly what they've done in their period in government or in the bureaucracy. I mean, most of that will be part of posturing. Most of that will be an attempt to strengthen certain factions and weaken other factions. The one thing that I'm very concerned about a policy conference like this is, you know, how much time is really going to be spent drilling down into policy. Karen just spoke about, not Karen, Carol just spoke about, sorry Carol, about economic policy. And in the ANC, normally work is you know, committees, reports is seen as a substitute for work almost. Once a plan is drawn up, you know, there's a belief that now we've done the work, and that's not actually how it works.
Who implements it?
It's about implementation. And the reaction earlier this week to the President's Electricity Action Plan, you know, by and large was positive, but every single person that commented on it said it's now about implementation, and that's the big problem with the ANC government. So when you say that delegates will call out government officials or bureaucrats, it's about faction fighting. It's not about policy. It's not about really seeing which policies work and which don't, because we simply don't know, because many of these policies that come through the ANC political process and eventually is turned into a government program is often not implemented or implemented very badly. So you know, I'd love for us to reach a stage where we can actually have proper policy discussions about what needs to be done to tackle unemployment, what needs to be done to tackle poverty, and because those issues are the issues that are supposed to be front and center. But unfortunately, given the time we're in, given the space we're in, given the fractious nature of the ANC 6 months out from an elective conference, Mpumi spoke about that, I think despite Mashatile and the provincial chair's best efforts to try and quell dissent and rebellion and all the rest of it, I do think that certain factions and certain provinces will use every chance they can to try and expose the other faction. And you know, it's easy to expose a government when you're in power, and in government you make a lot of mistakes. This government has made a lot of mistakes, and Ramaphosa and his supporters, enemies, will certainly pounce on that. But let's hope some proper policy discussion does happen, and especially, like Carol said, around economic policy, because that's supposed to be apart from safety and security and state capture. That's I think the most important commission.
Yeah, the NEC policy subcommittee issued a document yesterday saying, you know, trying to manage the rules and procedures for the conference, where they're trying to basically saying, we're going to allocate a certain amount of time for discussion, so that you don't have a degeneration of the conference focusing on proxy battles of factions, you know, so one weighing more than others. And so far there's sort of this, everyone sort of is saying the same thing. There's going to be 3 proxy themes. Step aside, the energy question, and then the issue around jobs, but broad of how that manifests itself. I want to ask you, Mpumelelo, if you could just break down this notion of proxy fighting, proxy battles to an ordinary person. What does it mean when we say that something is going to be a proxy fight at a policy conference, and why does it matter at all?
Well, basically, a proxy means, it's a disguise. You basically, there's an underlying issue or underlying faction that wants to use a particular matter to advance their cause. I'll tell you practically how it could potentially manifest in a policy conference like this. Take Pravin Gordhan, for example, the Minister of Public Enterprises. He is not a friend. In fact, he's the enemy of the RET faction, right? And he has got this enormous task of trying to transform the state-owned enterprises, instill good governance, get rid of corruption, and all of that. And so if people raise issues in this policy conference that have got to do with the SOEs, and they are saying, listen, Eskom is not performing, which of course it is true, and people at Denel had not been paid. There's been no transformation of governance at Denel. The company is just basically disintegrating, right? Which of course is true. The Transnet is failing to perform optimally, and is basically strangling the country's export capacity. Of course, all of those things are true, and all those things require genuine policy responses. Why have you not been able to get these SOEs and many others into the right shape? Those are kind of like technical discussions. What kind of boards are we having? Is the legislation working? Is the PFMA working? Under the radar, raise those issues, whether the PFMA is working for Eskom and it needs faster procurement of spares and all. Those are technical things. You can actually have good policy discussion around that. But instead of a good policy discussion around that, you're going to have a situation where Pravin is put out there as an opponent of the RET and is attacked. So they will use a legitimate case that Eskom is not performing to basically attack somebody who they think is a political opponent. That's how proxy politics work. So in the end, you might actually win your argument because there is a valid case to be made that these things are not performing, but you're not actually advancing a solution. Instead, you're attacking a person who's your political opponent and maybe defeating them for the purpose of this discussion. But what is the solution in the end? There is no solution.
And then it becomes about personalities, doesn't it?
Yes,
rather than the substance of a policy discussion like
exactly. Another example of a proxy debate is like there's a interesting, and as I said earlier, a very good a proposal to say if you are charged, step aside, right? It's a very good sound. You can actually debate it. You can look at the Constitution of the Republic. You can look at the Anti-Corruption Act. You can look at the PFMA. So that policy basically supports already good policies that are in government to deal with corruption. Never mind that they're not implemented, but they're actually very good. So you actually have the party mutually reinforcing good policy space in government by the way it conducts itself, right? So, but instead of having a debate like that, how do we enhance the constitution and the party government policy and all of that?
And weighing considerations around innocent until proven guilty.
Yes.
You can have that nuanced debate, but it's not.
Instead of having that debate, you're going to have a discussion about step aside, it's not fair, there'll be other issues. But at the back, it's actually trying to say we want Ace to come back, Ace Makhashuri to come back. We want Zandile Kumete to keep standing even as she goes on trial. So that's why this proxy politics makes it difficult for people to engage on issues on a basis of like objectivity. It's always like there's another side to it. So people are gonna like, okay, if we win the step aside, guys, the first thing we're gonna get in the December conference is to say the conference doesn't start unless we could bring back all the people that had been because if you win the step aside, the scrapping of step aside here, it doesn't mean that ACE or other people that have been suspended immediately come back because it's still not ANC decision, right? Only the conference in December can actually be take the decision, the resolution. So they'll go to the conference in December if they win here to say, listen, before this conference starts, let's pass a resolution that we adopted at the policy conference and make it the decision of the ANC to scrap the step aside so that all comrades can participate. So you see, that's how this proxy politics work. And the country doesn't move forward. The ANC doesn't move forward. It continues to degenerate.
And I mean, just looking at, you know, the discussion before this, yesterday, our colleague Zinhle Mahlati was speaking to provincial leaders, Sponiso Duma, the newly elected provincial chairperson, Oscar Mabuyane, as well as Muzichiwa from Mpumalanga, and just kind of getting a sense from them what is their delegation going to push forward. And you know, there's almost this kind of concession, yeah, we'll speak about the economy, but this one, you know, and the thing is, the party risks something that it has been accused of consistently, which is so inwardly focused without realizing the consequences it has on ordinary people. Carol, you spoke to Mamluku Kubai, the ANC Economic Transformation Chair, and she raised a very important issue, which is the state will not abandon its role in the economy. And the reason why I'm raising this in the context of what Mpumelelo just said is that I've been to KZN, you know, last week. I've been to other provincial conferences. I've been to other, you know, caucus meetings here and there. There's almost this sponsored line to say the ANC is you know, subletting its power to private sector. And they cite Pravin Gordhan's decision around SAA, and I think obviously the announcement by the president this week is also going to be seen in that vein. Not merely an academic discussion around liberalization of the economy, but this thing of, you know, Pansi Stellenbosch in our economy, Pansi, you know, that level of populism. And I think that somewhat this issue of whether premised on reality or not, that the state is abandoning its role in the economy is going to also be a manifestation of these proxy fights.
Yeah, exactly. I think it will be, and I think that it's the energy plan and the fact that the quickest way, and the only real way now to get more megawatts onto the national grid is to call the private sector and say, please go ahead, build, we'll make it easy for you. Because the state doesn't have the capacity. Eskom is got 400 billion rands of debt. It's struggling to run its existing power station. So there isn't actually another alternative. But the implication of that plan is that, you know, let's bring in the private sector for something we've always wanted and thought the state should do, and what we've been holding on to. And so that makes you know, Ramaphosa politically vulnerable. And I think this is why...
Can one argue, sorry to interrupt you, Carol, can one argue that Ramaphosa is moving towards the right?
Well, yes. I mean, I think there's always been a centrist ANC.
Yes.
And a left. And in the centrist ANC, the politics of the economy has always been free market, pretty much free market, and market friendly, and a push to make the environment investor friendly, but at the same time, because you've got this left, you've got these contradictions all the time. So you never get what investors call policy certainty. You never know, where are we, where are we going? Are we going this way?
Because you have to appease this one and appease that one.
And so that's so I think that it will be easy for those people, for the RET people, and even not even necessarily RET people in Ramaphosa's own camp, to say this is not the direction. This is a move to the right.
Can I just ask you, Pieter, the ANC no longer has the luxury of having idealist policies, and corruption in the state of the economy does not give it the luxury of having these grand developmental agendas and whatever it sold to its support base for all of these years.
Well, that's exactly the point. You know, there's no more space left for the ANC to come with all these fantastical ideas. There's no more space left for, even though, you know, Carol speaks about the left. I mean, the reality on the ground is that all of these programs and plans are misfiring, and the single most important manifestation is when the lights go off in all our households every second night. So the ANC and government don't have any options left anymore other than trying to co-opt and bring in the private sector. But the private sector seems to be tired of the government's promises as well. The private sector, like Carol said, is struggling to get policy certainty. So for the private sector to get involved, whether it is at SAA or whether it is with private rail concessions or at Portnet, they need certainty, and they don't have that. And when we emerge from this policy conference, with the biggest issue being step aside, and the ANC have not engaged with proper policy discussions, what's the private sector going to do? They're going to watch this policy conference, as we are going to do, very closely to see if any new creative or dynamic ideas come to the fore. But it doesn't look like it's going to happen. So you're right, there's no space left. They don't have the luxury anymore. And the electorate is getting tired as well. I mean, we are 18 months away from the next general election. And people are now starting to see through the ANC and starting to see that, look, implementation is a massive problem, corruption is a massive problem, and like Mpumi said, leadership is a massive problem. You need a president to be able to take the bit between his teeth, to be willing to lose allies and enemies, and to be willing to take some political hits in order for the country to move forward. But again, the navel gazing, the fact that the ANC is so, and the public, and to a certain extent ourselves as well, we're so focused on the internal wranglings of the ANC that people start forgetting the bigger picture and the bigger national interest. And it's the national interest that I think has gone lost over the last while.
I think it's worse than navel gazing, because you take something like the energy sector. Yeah. The ANC doesn't just assert, Ramaphosa doesn't just assert this is the direction. We're going, we're inviting the private sector, and he also says, but we're also thinking about Eskom 2.0.
Yeah.
So those of you who are not happy, well, we're going to have Eskom 2.0, but Eskom 2.0 is a figment of everyone's imagination, not a real thing. There's no money to fund to set up a new state-owned company. So that then again, so just as the private sector feels, okay, great, we're moving in this direction, along comes Eskom 2.0, and we're like, oh my gosh, what's this now? Is this so that's such a good example of how the ANC's internal politics keep on interfering with economic progress.
Can I ask you this question? It may be very simplistic, but is Eskom 2.0 an effort to appease people like Gwede Mantashe to say that coal will still be central to our energy security plans?
I don't think necessarily it's a coal issue, but definitely it is. That is exactly what it is. It is an attempt to say, well, don't worry, Eskom is getting smaller, but we're going to have another state-owned company, which we're going to build up. So don't worry, we're not giving up on our responsibilities. So it is very much that, especially when people know, Ramaphosa knows, you're not going to want to know that there's no money to you're going to set up a new energy company, you're going to capitalize it. You still haven't even paid off Eskom's 400 billion rand debt. So
You and I have spoken about this previously around what does Ramaphosa like, not what people have said to him, not what he's been advised, not what the unions want, none of that. What does Ramaphosa think is the best plan to deal with Eskom debt? And he can't tell you that.
Well, he says crazy things, actually, because well, so this has been the problem, is that this debt has actually, not only is it a problem for the country that there's this massive debt, but it's a problem for Eskom. So Eskom can't go to the bank and borrow when it needs to expand its transmission grid. Can't do that. And so this debt problem needs to be fixed. And for years now, we've been sitting on the debt problem and passing it around to everybody. What should we do? What should we do? And no one's taken a decision.
Yeah. Qaanitah, you remember that Enoch Kotongwana, the finance minister, once proposed that the government should sell off some of Eskom's assets, some power stations, and get private sector people to manage them. And now we hear about Eskom 2.0, right? So it basically means that you don't get a sense in government that there's a particular direction they want to take.
It's almost schizophrenic in some way, right?
So if you look, I mean, you remember the first time the Gwede Mantashe lifted the the limit
Yes.
to 100
After
megawatts.
being arm wrestled by the president.
Yes, it was in the middle of load shedding.
Yes.
Right? What happened now recently when it was uplifted completely? It was in the middle of load shedding.
Yeah.
So you were having a policy, a crisis-driven policy making. So the policy is always responding to a crisis. It's not a policy that on its own is based on a particular vision you want to achieve.
Which the president's not taking ownership
So each time
of.
there's a crisis, okay, let's lift the
Yeah.
limit for renewable energy generation. There's another load shedding to stage 6. Oh, let's lift it completely. So you ask yourself, independent of the crisis, what was the government's own vision going forward? So if you think about it along those lines, then you can see that actually there's no coherent policy. And that's why there's no policy on how to deal with the debt. And the president is at sea about it.
Yeah.
There's no policy how to deal with these power stations going forward. There's no agreement in government. Andre de Ruyter believes, and the president seems to agree with him, that a lot of them would be mothballed eventually and there will be sites of renewable energy generation, right?
Yeah.
Other people believe that they can be sold off, as Ino Kodongana said before. They can be sold to private sector who can continue to run them and for base load purposes. And there's no agreement on how the debt is going to be sorted. Gwede Mantashe believes that if we set up another Eskom separately, we will run away from this debt.
Yeah.
So, so that's the problems we're having.
There was a bizarre, line that the president said in his address on Monday that really, made me laugh out loud. And he said, in dealing with this crisis of Eskom, ministers will have to, ministers who are now responsible for dealing with this plan that he put out to the nation will have to start reporting to me directly. And I laughed, and I laughed about it because I said, you are the president. You are the leader of cabinet. They do report to you what has been happening for the last 5 years.
Yeah.
And I thought, this is a president who has not fully grasped the, I don't know if it's the authority or the reality of the power that he has in fixing these problems, and that it is him who is at the behest of whether this plan works or not.
Look, and we spoke in a previous conversation about the quality of the people around him, the quality of ministers, the quality of the leadership of different departments. Over the last couple of years, he has increasingly started to centralize some functions in the president's office. I mean, the project office by Rudy Dix is a direct response to the different policy or the blockages in different departments. And why do you have to have a separate mechanism inside the president's office to try and unblock certain policy problems that you have, which is caused by poor performance in government departments and directors general and ministers? I mean, it's reflective of the quality of those people around him. He certainly can't trust all the ministers in his cabinet. We know that Gordhan and Mantashe and the president don't sit around the same fire as far as energy policy is concerned. So that's a problem for him. I mean, he cannot, even if he had the urgency in Mpumi and Carol that we want him to have, it's almost impossible to execute that given the quality of people around him.
Well, I don't think it's necessarily the quality of people. I would put it down to, actually I've written about it, and one time one of the officials in the presidency was interested in why I was saying what I was saying, but we never got to engage further because the issue, I think, it's his management of cabinet. It starts there. You have to manage your cabinet as a collective and also individually and also according to the
Political factions.
the factions and also the clusters in government.
Yeah.
So if he managed cabinet tightly and people knew that, listen, this is what the president wants, you can't deviate from this script, you wouldn't have people talking the way they talk. You wouldn't have Gwede Mantashe saying, my arm was twisted. Why must his arm be twisted? He's part of cabinet. He's part of the collective. Nobody's arm gets twisted. You are there to implement the agenda of the president. The president doesn't have to twist you. You take a mandate from him. You wouldn't have a minister questioning the constitution.
But surely you would have realized by now, Mpumi, that this kind of consensus building in cabinet, that's not the way to run a country, surely.
No, but cabinet works as a collective. You can't run away from that. So according to the constitution, they take decisions of which they're responsible individually and also as a collective. So the idea that you can come out of cabinet and say something else. And they say, I mean, just imagine this happening. Picture this happening. Say it's Mbeki. Mbeki is the president, and a minister comes out of cabinet and say, the president twisted my arm. I didn't want to do this. I'm not sure whether you can do that under Mbeki.
But can I say the president himself uses that sentiment in that I may some of the decisions I make is not my true conviction. It's a product of the politics at play. It's this constant thing of like, I was strong armed. It really wasn't me. I was strong armed. It's not my fault. Which is as a result.
Surprised.
Yes, which is a result of the Ramaphoria and that in that thing of, you know, we created this narrative that the president is above and separate to the collective he leads, which is nonsense. I was not going to say.
But he has not mastered the art of managing cabinet. You remember what happened during lockdown?
Yes.
When there was this difference about like one of the regulations about cigarettes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And the president made an announcement that they were going to lift the ban.
And then
and subsequently, Minister Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, when she was asked about this thing, I mean, you could read from her facial expression how frustrated and how annoyed she appeared to be that the president had made an announcement, whereas the cabinet committee dealing with it had a different view. So the president had now had to backtrack and come back to the discussion and say, listen, it was my mistake. Actually, the collective had agreed as follows. Now, as a leader, you can't be behaving like that. You always have to be ahead of everybody.
But they say that during cabinet discussions, and the same in NEC meetings, there's a sense of I don't know if the word is, you know, condescending sense
from the ministers,
from the president in some way. I'll clarify what I mean in this regard, where there's all of this discussion, and then the president comes in the end with the platitudes so what happens then is that the firm decision is not owned by him, and so when there's a communication of a decision around anything, there isn't a sense of, okay, the president has rubber stamped this. So there's almost a sense of where he creates a little bit of distance between the decision and him. And what happens then is that you can't say that this is what the president wanted. If you look at the height of state capture, whether it was that cabinet meeting around cabinet intervening in the Gupta's bank account details, or whether it was Waterkloof, the president's as corrupt or as sinister, as unscrupulous as it was, you knew where the president stood. If you take the July unrest, for example, and that's something obviously I've researched quite closely, in all of those meetings, the president was a minute taker. He was a facilitator of dialogue. He was a peacekeeper in warring.
Not a decision maker.
Not a decision maker. And that's where you have this problem you say about managing cabinet, is that at the end of it, everyone said their bit. Nkosazana made her lobby. Modeling Gogombele said what he needed to say. At the end of the day, I, as the leader of this organization, of the CEO of the executive, this is it. This is the line, and I can justify it based on these arguments you made and based on these arguments you made. You don't see that.
Just to bring that point back to the policy conference, because it's a classic ambiguity that sort of permeates everything in the ANC. So you get it. It permeates through decisions. It permeates through policy. And it permeates through their resolutions, which is why they have this problem on the step aside, because the step aside has been fought. The precise meaning of the step aside and what it actually means to implement it has been fought over since Nasrec.
Yeah.
And now having thought we'd actually resolved it back then, and then in the NEC having resolved it, we're now going to fight about it again. And one of the reasons why it's even able to be brought up as an issue is because of the ambiguity, it's been unevenly implemented. There are all these contradictions, so people have been treated differently. Some people were allowed to stand, others weren't allowed to stand.
Yeah.
And that sort of, you see that in all ANC policy, and in fact, because the ANC is a broad church, it's kind of suited them.
Yeah.
It suited them to have these ambiguous policy resolutions that everyone can live with. You know, the whole broad church is happy because you got in your sentence about private sector participation, and you got in your sentence about Eskom will remain state-owned.
As contradictory as things are.
Yeah. And that's why we have these problems, and now it's catching up with the ANC. This policy ambiguity and this well, we'll talk left, we'll walk right, is catching up, and they've run out of road on that.
And can I tell you, when I reflected on the president eventually getting to the ANC KZN conference last weekend, and I mean, it was completely hostile, and yes, it was, a political balancing act that he had to do to go there and appease his open enemies in the ANC. But the fact that there isn't the sense of you are talking nonsense that the judiciary, because they say to him, we're going to let you speak if you consider these things. And the first thing is how we treat Zuma. The second thing is the judiciary is, playing into politics. And where does he have the backbone, as he's trying to, yes, appease and manage factions, to backbone to say, this is off the table. This attacking of Zondo and calling him a politician is not it. I just appointed him as Chief Justice. I can't allow it in my presence. That is it that I think we're not going to see when he starts speaking at 10 o'clock, to say, yes, we can talk about all of this, but this is the line we dare not cross.
Well, it's because ANC politics will now trump everything for the next 6 months, wouldn't it? I mean, the president won't make any decision now which within the next 6 months ahead of the elective conference could weaken his position, nor will decisions be taken that would give ammunition to the other faction, or would serve as a form of attack. So, and that's where the national interest as the head of state. That's what's it's been a frustration of mine for many years. You need to understand internal ANC dynamics in politics, and you need to be able to understand that the ANC, given the fact that it has been so dominant, the dominant party for the last 30 years, demands and leads to ANC politics being the dominant drama on our political scene. But there are certain instances and times and periods and incidents where the national interest should come to the fore, and that's one. I mean, you need to defend the independence of the judiciary. The only thing that the judiciary has is its credibility as the third arm of state. And if that's attacked and undermined, like we've seen someone like Lindiwe Sisulu do over the last couple of months, she recently wrote another opinion piece in The Independent which attacked the judiciary. The president is not known, like you said, for coming out strongly around issues like that, and that weakens the state, that weakens government, that weakens the constitution, and that weakens the ANC's ability to govern.
I mean, if you just look at the ANC's balance of forces document that was released, that's going to be presented by Thabang Makwetla this morning, they talk about the July unrest, for example, but also the consideration that the weakening of the state was a huge contributing factor in this, in that the state did not play its role in terms of asserting its authority, and that being at the center of why what happened was allowed to happen. But I'm just looking at the program as we wrap up now. So today's day one of the ANC Policy Conference. There is going to be, the normal protocol being observed, messages of support. The president will address the gathering. Then there's going to be a plenary session, credentials, programs, and rules of conference. Like we said yesterday, Carol, it's not a voting conference, but the credentials matter because how big delegations play an important role, right?
Right, exactly, yeah.
And then we have strategy and tactics, balance of forces, organizational renewal. So all of these presentations, and then the commission start, where the interesting this afternoon, it's organizational strategy, development and sustainability, balance of forces, organizational renewal, like I said, gender and women's emancipation, and combating state capture and corruption. So if there's two things that's going to be quite fierce today, it's the combating state capture and corruption that's going to see a lot of debate, and I think organizational renewal, where step aside, like you said, Pumi comes to play. So that's what the day looks like today. It's going to be a long night, I think, but more importantly, I think how the tone is set this morning is going to be pivotal in what comes out. Like I said yesterday, Paul Mashatile is trying to manage debate, manage any effort to fight issues at all costs. Where you saw some conferences resulting in almost fistfights in 2017 around the issue of land. It's going to be heated. I think they're trying very hard for it to just go as smooth as possible. I'm going to start this way, which is just final thoughts based on everything that we said here. Mpumelelo, day one, what is your expectation and what is in your mind as you now drive to the south of Johannesburg, where the ANC is hosting its policy conference?
Aside all the big policy issues and all the challenges we're facing the country, right? I think this is a policy conference of the ANC. I would actually expect that at the very least, even if they can't solve the problems of the country, in fact they're incapable in many other respects, but at the very least they should at least get themselves organized as a party. Get Luthuli House to do the most basic administration and the most basic organizational functions right. You're having a big policy conference here, a lot of motorcades coming here, but there are people toying outside Luthuli House not being paid. You have got policy documents of the ANC in power for 28 years, riddled with grammatical and spelling mistakes. And the ANC has got access to a lot of expertise in the whole country, but it can't put together documents that are properly written and well edited. And you have got a situation where the governing party, from the headquarters, it doesn't seem to be able to manage provinces and regions. It's got rebellion, some mayor somewhere in Komazi. It cannot get rid of the mayor, but it says this guy is not our candidate. So at least those basic organizational functions, the ANC must get it right before you can even go to abstracts like judiciary and independence of the judiciary, whether some people want the parliamentary system to come back, or we are happy with the current system where the constitution is supreme, it's not a majoritarian system. Those things they talk about in those documents. At least the ANC must demonstrate that it can get the most basic things right. And then in that fashion, it can inspire people to believe that when it actually talks about big things, those big things are indeed doable.
Carol Paton says the ANC needs to get its house in order. What do you think?
Well, yeah, I mean, it certainly does. And I think, if there were two tickets that Ramaphosa came in on. The one was, he's going to wipe out corruption. The other one is going to renew the ANC. And so the big question then that will because today are those exact commissions, organizational renewal and issues on the stepper side. Those are we're going to know now. I think we'll start to know is it even possible? I mean, many people have speculated: is it possible? Is it not possible? Lots of people say not possible to renew the ANC, and Ramaphosa's there with a kind of last shot at renewal, and whether he's able to pull it off or the tide is just too strong.
Pieter?
Look, I'm looking forward to see the ANC up close again. Conferences like this is always fascinating to see the interaction between individuals on stage, to see the dynamics between people, to see which group sings against whom. So, conference like this is an opportunity for all of us to see how the party operates from up close again, to see what works and what doesn't. There's a lot of stuff that we know don't work. Let's see what does work. Let's see how the individuals respond and react to each other. There's always a story in that. So I'm looking forward to see the ANC up close for a couple of days again.
All right. Thank you all. It's going to be a long day. This has been a fascinating discussion. All of my colleagues who joined me here have written wonderful columns on what to expect and the analysis of the ANC as its policy conference begins. You can get that all on News24. We are also bringing you all the live updates from the ANC policy conference. We have a big team that News24 has at the Nasrec Conference Center, and we will be giving you rolling updates throughout today and the weekend. So follow everything on news24.com. Thank you again for joining us. We'll be back here tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. and have a good day.